let's drill down into this in a little bit more detail with Mark Littlewood, Director of Popular Conservatism. Mark, it's great to have you on the programme. Now, I'm always a fan of bonfires of the quangos, but that's not really what the Labour Party's doing. It might be scrapping NHS England, but when it comes to other quangos, they've been on a bit of a quango creation spree, haven't they?
Yeah, Alex, that's right. You said a few minutes ago that you're not minded to shower Keir Starmer with praise. I'm not minded to shower him with praise either, but I might sprinkle a few drops of praise on him, actually, for this NHS England thing. It is the biggest quango. I'm glad it's going. We can argue about how we would like healthcare provision in Britain to be provided in future. Do we think it should all be provided by the government and the health minister, or do we think that we should have more people in private care? But insofar as you're going to have a National Health Service, I want it run by the Health Secretary, not some quango. I was actually talking to a former Health Secretary a couple of weeks ago. He said it was a nightmare working with NHS England. You couldn't even get any information out of them. So I'm quite glad that it's going to be Wes Streeting and his successors whose heads are going to be on the block if the NHS goes wrong, rather than this detached quango. But Alex, you're right. I think that Labour has created 27, is it, new quangos since coming to office in July. So it's sort of one step forward, 20-odd steps back, unfortunately.
Well, this is it. The quango body count at present is apparently over 300,000 employees. The biggest one was NHS England, RIP. Next down is Education and Skills Funding Agency. What do they do?
Very good question. If you go through all of these different quangos, you can usually guess a little bit by the name. I think we finally, a few years ago, scrapped the British Potato Council. I think they were having to do with making sure that potato blight didn't occur. So the skills and training stuff will be to try and assist people with skills and training. Generally speaking, what these quangos are trying to do is not of itself nuts. The problem is that they are completely unaccountable to Parliament. So we get into the odd position in which our politicians think that they're in government to sort of pull levers and push buttons, but actually they're just sort of pushing string. They can't get anything done. So I'd like to go through all of them. I think there's north of 400, probably getting towards 500 of these quangos, these quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organisations who aren't really answerable to anybody. I'd like to go through the lot of them, either abolish each one or privatise each one. Perhaps there are some that could stand on their own 2 feet if they were supported by the sector that they actually operate in, or if there are key functions they do, bring those into government departments. So that's what's happening with NHS England. But as I say, that's one out of more than 400. Let's go through the whole list.
I cannot believe it's that many, Mark. Seriously, that is absolutely obscene. I've actually got the list in front of me of the sort of top 8 or so. And after NHS England, bye-bye. You've got Education and Skills Funding Agency. Lord knows what that does that the Department of Education doesn't do. HM Revenue and Customs. Well, we know what they do. I have my brush with them every year. Wouldn't mind if they go, but that probably won't ever happen. Network Rail, and we've had a lot of them in recent years. UK Research and Innovation. I mean, I do like the idea of investing into research and innovation and our sort of body of brilliance when it comes to technology and science that we've been, joint world leaders for a number of years. But you kind of think, do they really need 9.3 billion quid? Then, of course, coming in after them, my absolute favourite of them all, HS2. HS2 at £6.9 billion. It's mental. HS2, honestly, I get such a bee in my bonnet about HS2. I once sat there and meticulously made a flowchart of since HS2 was announced to today, where it still frankly doesn't exist, all the other things that have been invented. And it's basically all the social media platforms, Zoom conversations, half of Dubai's been built, and China's built the entirety of its own 2,000-kilometre odd high-speed rail across the entire country. And we've spent billions of pounds just talking about a train line that's going to go from some station in London no one's heard of to Birmingham, cut about 10 minutes off the journey when nobody commutes for work anyway anymore.
Alex, I share your despair. HS2 would definitely be one that I would put entirely on the chopping block rather than salvage at all. I think it was when was it that India spent, I think, £100 million getting an unmanned flight to Mars? So the Indians are spending 100 million getting to Mars. We were planning on spending 100 billion getting to Birmingham. Doesn't seem to be a particularly good use of funds or money. And then the other interesting thing you get, of course, if you go deeper and deeper into this list of quangos, Alex, is often they're at war with each other. So even if HS2 were being able to actually sort of lay some track and move a bit beyond just Zoom calls and the rest of it and planning, and I think they spent a lot on Lego, didn't they, to recreate what one of the stations would look like, you'll have other quangos that are getting in their way. The infamous Bat tunnel that we had to spend an absolute fortune, was it tens of millions of pounds to build a tunnel over some part of HS2 to protect bats. I think it came in at £500,000 for each bat saved. Rather better care and treatment and money than we throw at keeping people alive on the National Health Service. So, yeah, let's go through the whole list. I feel your pain too, Alex, on Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. Bad news is I think we're probably not going to get rid of the tax collector. There is a question about shouldn't they just be part of the Treasury Department rather than some independent quango? So if things go wrong or it's too difficult to get through on the phone, that it's the Chancellor of the Exchequer or one of the Chancellor's ministers who's directly responsible for it. So I hope this isn't a one-off with NHS England. I hope we do now start to go methodically through the list. But as we've already alluded to, unfortunately, even if you make a surprise announcement to kill one quango, 2 or 3 others seem to pop up almost every week.
Well, it must have occurred to some sort of sharp-brained listeners that NHS England operated only to manage the health services in England, and frankly we can do without it, which to me leads me very neatly down the logical path of, well, why do we need all the devolved ones? In fact, why do we need devolution? Surely the biggest quangos in the world are the government of Wales and the government of Scotland.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, we've done devolution in a pretty cack-handed way, really, not just at the Scottish and Welsh level, but at the mayoral level as well. We've typically set up either these parliaments or these mayoral offices, not really to take big decisions about tax and spend in their areas, but to be the most effective begging bowl they can be for Westminster. So I wouldn't have too much problem with devolution if at local level you are making the hard choice, the hard trade-off choice about whether you wanted to tax more to spend more on public services or tax a bit less and allow more money to reside in the pockets of your residents. But tax and spend decisions, I think 95% of all tax and spending decisions are made at Westminster. If you're going to have that amount of tax and spend made at Westminster, it's a bit of a head scratcher about why you need different bodies. But if we were actually to give proper tax and spending powers and perhaps some regulatory powers to local, regional level or even to the nations, well, then it could work. But what we've actually done is to set up these bodies really to press Westminster, to lobby Westminster for more and more funding. So devolution has not worked as it should have done and was always badly designed.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see the back of those ridiculous parliaments, that's for sure. Let's talk now about Ed Miliband, because he's gone off to China. He's gone off to lobby them to shore up support for multilateral climate action, especially after the US has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. Do you think Xi Jinping is sitting there in China going, oh, well, you know, now Trump's doing drill, baby, drill. We better not use our own fossil fuels. We better, like, get on the net zero train and self-flagellate at the altar of wokery and kill off our industry. I doubt it. I mean, what on earth is he playing at?
Yeah, my guess would be, not that I'm particularly well connected to the Chinese Communist Party, you'll be glad to hear, Alex, but my guess would be that they think when they see Ed Miliband that there is a sucker born every minute. If we wish to continue on the economic suicide mission of carbon net zero to by 2050, guess what? The Chinese communists will be extremely happy to help us along that pathway of self-destruction, to sell us the kit that we need in order to build more solar, wind or whatever. So I'm highly sceptical that the Chinese themselves are going to do anything to lower carbon emissions. In fact, if you were to look at a graph of likely carbon emissions over the next 20 or 30 years, the UK basically flatlines and falls off a little, and we're already less than 1% of global carbon emissions. So it makes precious little difference, actually, what happens to carbon emissions in the UK. And China just zooming upwards in terms of carbon emissions. So rather curious destination for Ed Miliband, but I'm unsurprised that the Chinese communists will be welcoming him in open arms.
Why wouldn't they? I mean, it's utterly mad. This is a huge divergence from American foreign policy. And Sir Keir Starmer seems to sort of, been trotting over to the White House going, we've got our special relationship, looking at Donald Trump like a sad, snickering little sycophant, touching him like this. Oh, Donald, please love me. And then he's sending off his little weasel Miliband to go and sign checks for China to basically destroy our own industries. And they're predatory mercantilists. We know this. You couldn't make the madness up. Now, before I let you go, sickness benefits have gone on steroids under Labour. Now, in theory, nothing has actually changed in the way that sickness benefits are allocated or judged. But for some reason, more than 1.8 million people are now on the highest rate of universal credit with no support to look for work. And that's compared with 360,000 at the start of the pandemic in early 2020. So that's increased by nearly 70%. I mean, that's mad. Almost 2,000 people every day are being judged too sick to work and are now being placed on this highest rate of universal credit. What's going on?
Yeah, well, I mean, Alex, it's an economic problem here, not a health problem. If you pay more and more people to be sick, guess what? More and more people will officially be sick. I think it's also particularly, we see the rise in mental health problems, which I'm not hand-waving away. Some people do have serious mental health problems, but they are obviously notoriously harder to diagnose and judge than a physical health problem. You can clearly show if somebody's got a heart problem or broken a leg or requires cancer treatment. The extent to which you're depressed, is it mild, is it moderate, is it severe, much more contestable. So if you have a system in which it is relatively easy and becoming easier to sign off sick, because one of the things that has changed radically since the pre-COVID era is we're doing much less checking up on people to see whether they really are still ill or still unfit for work. Well, then more and more people are going to be on sickness benefit. I mean, I think of the working age population now, we're getting towards 3 million people of working age who, for one reason or another, are unable to work at all. I'm not talking about people who are off ill for a week or so because they've got flu. I'm talking about people who literally cannot work at all because they are so ill. Well, I mean, that's sort of, 10% of the working population. So ill, so afflicted that they can't possibly consider doing any work in anything like the medium term. Something has gone horrifically wrong here. So I think we've got to change the way that we do these sort of medical checkups. I'm not suggesting that sort of doctors and GPs are in on this. They're not. But if a patient comes to see a GP and says, oh, I've got this problem and that problem, it's very easy for the GP just to sign them off. Why have a fight about it? It's not their money. It's not their company who's losing an employee to sickness benefits. So we've probably got to tighten that up somewhat. And you've got to have a much better incentive to actually get to work. If you make it relatively easier and relatively more attractive to sit on your sofa at home and relatively less attractive to get up and go to the office, guess what? We'll have more people sitting on the sofa, and that's exactly what we've got.
Well, exactly. It is human nature, one can say. I remember the good old days when you'd have photographs in tabloid newspapers of someone who said they had a bad back going on a bungee jump. The naming and shaming of benefits fraud. Where did those days go? Mark Littlewood, fantastic having you on, the programme director of Popular Conservatism.
Well, thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed that video, please make sure you give it a like and subscribe to the Popcon YouTube channel. You can also find out more about us on our website, popularconservatism.com, and you can follow us on social media. Details are in the show notes below.